They were not prisoners. They were not dragged or screaming. They dressed in fine jewelry, drank from ceremonial cups, and calmly lay beside their king, knowing they would never stand again. This is not a myth. This is the royal graves of yore. And this is what absolute loyalty looked like 4,500 years ago. For thousands of years, the desert kept its secret. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers looked empty, lifeless, almost forgotten. Wind erased footprints, sand buried memory. Empires rose and vanished, and the world moved on, unaware that beneath this quiet soul lay one of the most unsettling truths of ancient history. Then, in the early 20th century, archaeologists digging near the ruins of the ancient city of Yore struck something unnatural. Not scattered bones, not the chaos of battle, but order, perfect order. They uncovered deep pits carved into the earth, carefully constructed, deliberately sealed. Inside were rows of human bodies laid side by side. Their posture was calm, their placement precise, their silence intentional. These people had not been dumped. They had been arranged, and they were dressed like royalty. Gold headpieces still rested on their skulls. Beads of lapis lazuli traced where necklaces once lay across chests. Bracelets circled wrists. Some held cups near their mouths. Others rested beside musical instruments, as if frozen in the middle of a ceremony that never ended. At the center of it all was the king. Yore was not a small settlement. Around 2600 BCE, it was one of the most powerful cities on earth. Its streets bustled with merchants, priests, craftsmen, and scribes. Its temples rose high, dedicated to gods believed to control harvests, floods, and fate itself. The king of Yore was not merely a ruler. He was a bridge between humanity and the divine. To serve the king was to serve the gods. To follow the king was to follow destiny. This belief was not symbolic. It was lived. It shaped how people ate, worked, married, and died. In Yore, hierarchy was sacred. The king stood at the top, chosen by the gods, protected by rituals, surrounded by divine favor. His death was not an ending. It was a transition, and transitions required company. When the king died, the city did not simply mourn. It prepared. The royal burial was not a private affair. It was a public declaration that the king's power did not stop at death. He would rule in the afterlife just as he had ruled among the living. But a king could not rule alone. The people found in the royal graves were not enemies or slaves thrown away. Evidence suggests they were attendants, musicians, guards, and court members. People who had lived close to power. People who had benefited from it. People who understood exactly what was being asked of them. They were given ceremonial clothing. They were provided with precious objects. They were arranged with care. Archaeologists found no signs of struggle, no broken bones, no defensive wounds. Whatever happened next, it was controlled, intentional. The graves tell a story not of chaos, but of ritual, of preparation, of acceptance. Imagine the city in those final days. The drums, the prayers, the quiet understanding passing from one phase to another. These people knew where they were going. They knew what it meant. And still, they walked forward, not because they were forced at sword point, but because belief can be stronger than fear. This was loyalty taken to its final form. A society so convinced of its order that death itself became a duty. In Yore, the king did not descend alone into the earth. He was followed by those who believed their place beside him was eternal, and the sand closed over them all, sealing not just bodies, but a question humanity still struggles to answer. How far will people go for power they believe is sacred? The answer was waiting beneath the desert, perfectly arranged, untouched by time. Power does not begin with violence. It begins with belief. Long before the first body lay down in the royal graves of Yore, the city had already been trained to obey. From birth, every citizen learned their place in a universe ruled by gods, fate, and hierarchy. The king was not simply a man who ruled armies and land. He was chosen, appointed by divine forces no ordinary person could question. To doubt the king was to doubt the gods themselves. This belief shaped everything. Crops rose and fell according to divine favor. Floods were signs of pleasure or punishment. Victory in war proved the gods' approval. And at the center of this system stood the king, living proof that the heavens were watching. So when the king died, something dangerous happened. The bridge between the human world and the divine world cracked. Death was not seen as an ending in Yore. It was a passage, a continuation of order beyond the reach of the living. But the afterlife was not imagined as peaceful or forgiving. It was dark, uncertain, and hierarchical, just like the world above. A king entering that realm alone would be vulnerable. Power, even divine power, needed reinforcement, and reinforcement came in human form. The attendants, musicians, guards, and servants who surrounded the king in life understood this truth better than anyone. Their status depended on proximity to power. Their safety depended on loyalty. Their future, as they believed, depended on remaining useful even after death. This is where modern minds struggle. Why would anyone agree to this? Because in your refusal meant more than survival. It meant exile from meaning. To reject the ritual was to declare oneself disloyal, not just to the king, but to the gods, to society, and to cosmic order itself. Living with that rejection may have been seen as worse than dying with honor. Archaeological evidence reveals something chilling. The individuals buried alongside the king were not bound or restrained. Their bodies show no signs of resistance. They were placed gently, often with personal objects, carefully dressed, and positioned with intention. Some held cups, some lay beside instruments, as if ready to perform. This suggests preparation, not panic. Many scholars believe a ceremonial drink was involved, something that allowed the followers to pass peacefully. If true, the final moments inside the burial chamber were not filled with screams, but silence, a silence thick with acceptance. Imagine standing there, the chamber lit by torches, the scent of incense in the air, priests chanting words that promised continuation, purpose, and honor beyond death. You are surrounded by others who have already accepted what is coming. No chains, no blades, just belief. Belief that your loyalty would be rewarded. Belief that your king would remember you. Belief that obedience had eternal value. This was not madness. It was structure. A system so complete that it convinced ordinary people to surrender the most basic human instinct, survival. The royal graves of yore reveal not just how people died, but how deeply power can root itself in the human mind. When authority is framed as sacred, obedience becomes moral, sacrifice becomes duty, and death becomes service. The most unsettling part is not that this happened, it is that it worked. The ritual was orderly, the graves were sealed, the city continued. No rebellion followed, no evidence of outrage survives. The system held, which raises a dangerous question. If belief can convince people to die calmly for a ruler they never see again, what else can it convince them to do? The answer does not belong only to the ancient world. Time buried the royal graves of yore, but it did not bury the lesson. For nearly 5,000 years, the people who chose death to follow their king lay untouched beneath the sand. Empires rose above them. Religions replaced older gods. New rulers claimed new titles. The world changed its language, its tools, its borders. Yet the mechanism that created those graves never disappeared. It simply learned to wear different faces. What the royal graves reveal is not an ancient obsession with death. It is something far more uncomfortable. They reveal how power survives by convincing people that obedience is sacred. In Yore, the king did not need chains or blades at the end. The work had already been done long before his death. The people had been shaped from childhood to believe that their lives gain meaning only through service to something higher than themselves. When belief is absolute, force becomes unnecessary. This is why the graves are so orderly, why there is no chaos, why there is no evidence of resistance. These people were not broken, they were convinced. And conviction is the most efficient weapon power has ever invented. Modern humans like to believe we are immune to this. We tell ourselves that we are rational, informed, independent, that ancient people were different, simpler, easier to control. But the structure remains familiar. Replace gods with ideology, replace kings with leaders, systems, or movements. Replace the afterlife with promises of legacy, honor, or belonging. The equation does not change. History shows us, again and again, that when authority presents itself as untouchable, questioning becomes betrayal. When loyalty becomes moral virtue, disobedience becomes sin. And when identity is fused with obedience, people will sacrifice not only others, but themselves. The people of yore did not think they were doing something horrific. They believed they were doing something right. That is the most dangerous part. The royal graves force us to confront an unsettling truth about human nature. We want meaning. We want structure. We want to belong to something larger than ourselves. And when power offers those things, wrapped in ritual and certainty, we are capable of surrendering far more than we think. Even our lives. The sand preserved these graves as a warning, not about ancient kings, but about us. About how easily loyalty turns into submission. About how belief, when left unquestioned, can lead ordinary people to walk calmly into darkness, convinced they are doing what must be done. This is not a story about death. It is a story about control. And it is not finished. Because every era produces its own versions of your different symbols, different words, same silence. The question history leaves us with is simple and deeply uncomfortable. If you had lived in your, would you have followed your king into the grave, or would you have been strong enough to walk away? History doesn't repeat itself because people forget dates. It repeats because people forget patterns. If stories like this make you see the past and the present differently, subscribe to the channel. This is not just history. This is how power really works. And the next story is even darker.